the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent in the relegation studio tonight. Kicked out of my apartment. My wife's getting ready for a party, so I've been relegated to the second floor common studio in my apartment building. I don't know if we're gonna have any surprise guests join us during this recording. Who knows? This is an open studio, but if they come in here, they're gonna get a very nice conversation. They're gonna learn about Bitcoin. I'd like to introduce you freaks to my guests. I'm very excited for this conversation. This is somebody who has hopped onto my radar more recently on Twitter in particular. It's running very good analysis and coverage of the space. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Yassine Elmandjra. Yassine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Marty. Honestly, I'm trying to keep my cool right now.
Oh, stop it.
But no, I mean, first of all, this is my first podcast. But more than that TFTC is my first podcast. You got a lot of fanboys out there, and I'm one of them. So it's really an honor to be here. Surreal, to be honest.
Stop it.
But
I'm just some nerd with a microphone.
I mean, you're a pretty cool nerd.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
No, it's been sweet seeing like you jump onto the scene again more recently, like in the summer. I didn't realize you just graduated college until minutes ago. So you graduated college in 2018. Let's dive right into your tale. How the hell did you get to Bitcoin, and how did you get to your position at ARK Invest, crypto asset analyst?
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the beautiful thing about Twitter is that no one knows your age until they meet you, and you're like, wait, what? You're only 22?
Exactly.
So, I mean, for me, that's been great. I really sell that a lot. I'm like, I'm the young guy who's allowed to make mistakes.
Right.
And so, honestly, my break into Bitcoin was definitely not your typical 2012 hobbyist miner who found the Satoshi white paper in a back page of the Bitcoin Talk forum. My break into Bitcoin was actually very recent as last year. Yeah, so I'm a newbie. So watch out. Whatever you read, it's to take it with a grain of salt for sure. But it was actually, so this is the end of my junior year, so that's right. I graduated from Penn in May of 2018.
Beautiful college.
Yes, and last time we spoke, I learned that you knew all about the bars.
All about the bars. I actually have I have a good case to make that I should get an honorary degree from Penn because I went to DePaul University. We were on trimesters. We had off from Thanksgiving to New Year's, and Penn was still in session when I would be home in Philly on that break.
So where'd you go? You went to Copa, I know.
Copa,
Smokes.
Blarney, Smokes.
Blarney, dude, this guy. Next time you're in the
Crew House. Shout out 208.
You see that? I don't even know the Crew House. Oh, the actual Penn Crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So do you have like affiliation with Penn?
Yeah, I had really good friends that went to Penn, and nice. I would go annoy them when I was on break, and they were still like in finals week and training for Crew. Shout out to the Penn Crew team.
Penn Crew team, yeah. My freshman year, the Penn Crew team would actually hand out flyers for people who were, tall and a little bit big, and like, you should try out for Penn Crew. And so a bunch of my friends,
I feel like every crew team does that.
That's right. A bunch of my friends the first week, they're like, yeah, I'm a varsity sports player. They try out, they realize that they have to go train for 5 a.m. every single day, and on week 2 they quit. So
it's if you're not down for the hard workouts of Crew, which I never was, if you're not cut out for it, it's a very arduous practice. Yeah, erging is no easy feat.
Yeah, and so I've been told. You think that those machines are easy, but there's a specific technique, and it's quite grueling.
It's an endurance sport. We talked about Crew with Alex Legal when he was on. Oh, nice. So you're at Penn. What are you studying? How'd you find Bitcoin in particular?
Yeah, so I'm at Penn. I'm studying systems engineering and finance. So from the get-go, I was kind of really fascinated by this intersection between management and technology. I knew I kind of didn't want to be a corporate engineer right out of college, but at the same time, know enough to speak the language and not just fluff your way into the business world. And since the beginning, I kind of knew that I didn't want to take the traditional Penn route. So Wharton. They're a bunch of hardos, super cutthroat and competitive. you go your freshman year and everyone's in a suit and has, there are 600 resumes at hand and they're still a freshman. And you go into that info session and they're just like, this is how you're going to shake the guy's hand. This is how you're going to follow up on the email. This is how you're going to land that Goldman Sachs job. And I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. So
they're grooming you.
Sorry?
They're grooming you.
They're grooming you. That's exactly right. There's a playbook. And if you don't follow the playbook, then you
step out of line.
You're a loser. So I chose voluntarily to be that loser. I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. So kind of my approach, I didn't discover Bitcoin until my junior year, but my approach was like, I want to do something outside of your traditional route. So I got into Bitcoin end of my junior year. I was actually back home a couple weeks with my dad.
And for those of you freaks that don't know, Yassine is from Morocco.
Yes, I am from Casablanca, Morocco.
Casablanca, eh?
Yes, Casablanca.
What's it like being from Casablanca?
It's so great because you get to say, you're from Casablanca. It's super exotic. Huh? Mm-hmm. You also pick up the French language because we were colonized by the French. I don't like the French for that reason, but
okay. I'll let them know when I'm in Paris next week.
Yes, donc you're going to Paris, so you'll come to understand. And the great thing is that so Casablanca is a city that is go to the city not really to visit, but more so if you're living there, it's kind of like the financial hub. Mm-hmm. So my childhood, I was in the U.S. and then moved to Morocco and did middle school and high school there and then came back for college.
What part of the U.S. were you in?
I lived in California.
Oh, nice.
So Northern and Southern California, both. And it's great because it's very family oriented. So I'm a family oriented guy. And I just kind of learned to love my culture and my people and knowing very well that I'd come back to the U.S. To at least study and start out my career. Fun fact, every spring break, instead of going to your basic, PV on the beach, I'd go on a road trip with like 10 of my friends and we'd go road tripping in Morocco. And it would just be such an amazing time. So if anyone's out there who wants to go to Morocco, hit me up and I'll set up a trip and you will not regret it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I was telling you before we started recording the briefcase that I have sitting right here is from Morocco. My mom took a trip to Marrakesh. She brought that back.
The beautiful leather. I wonder.
It's strong leather.
It is.
I've had that for like almost a decade now.
Yeah, and in Marrakesh and in Fez specifically, they have these tanneries where you can actually see how the leather is being made. Yeah. And so towards the end, you kind of have to buy the leather because they showed you how it was made. They force you into buying it. So, So, at end of my junior year, and my dad randomly, serendipitously comes up to me and he's like, "Yo, before you leave." So it was before I was gonna be starting an internship, and he's like, "Before you leave, we should just find something to invest in. Let's find something to invest in, straight up." Boss, woke. and half jokingly, I was like, "Why don't we just buy Bitcoin?" And at the time, I honestly had no idea what Bitcoin was. I had kind of heard it through the grapevine in college and read your typical Bloomberg articles on how this was a Tulip Mania 2.0.
Very mediocre.
And so very, very, very mediocre. And so you can imagine my perception of Bitcoin. But neither of us were opposed to it in terms of like this being a potential avenue. So I literally that night. So I didn't have Twitter, and historically I've never really been a social media guy. So the fact that I'm now actively tweeting is a big deal for me.
I'm happy you joined us.
I'm happy I found you. So so. I went on YouTube, typed in Bitcoin. First video I find is a 37-minute video of Andreas Antonopoulos' introduction to Bitcoin. And I was very lucky because immediately the argument was just super compelling, right? This idea of a non-sovereign global monetary store of value that was permissionless, right? But at the same time, you had basically full control over your wealth. And so given that I was living in a third world country, given that in the past I've had very close relatives of mine who've actually had their wealth frozen and seized, like this was the 2 and 2 equals 4 kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of consumed his whole library that night. Told my dad, we're gonna buy some Bitcoin, and within the next week, I bought my first Bitcoin. And honestly, from there, I kind of fell in the rabbit hole, and I've been at it ever since. Funny thing about the first Bitcoin that I bought. So in Morocco, the legislation is still kind of up in the air about Bitcoin, and so we don't actually have any established exchanges. And so my first encounter with Bitcoin was through local Bitcoins.
Oh, nice.
Oh my gosh, dude! I went balls deep.
Explain that experience. What was that like?
So
how'd you set it up?
So I mean, I
use a site, but
yeah, I use the site. I downloaded the wallet. So I was literally going on YouTube saying, okay, Andreas is very cautious about the hot wallet thing. Make sure that you store it cold. So we downloaded a desktop wallet, and we basically reached out to the guy. He told us where to meet him. I had cash in one hand, my computer on the other, and we literally met in just this random alleyway in Casablanca.
Holy shit.
And imagine like us kind of, our first exposure to it was like, this is for criminals and drug lords.
Meeting in an alleyway.
And so I'm meeting in the alleyway, and it was such a great conversation. This guy had been in Bitcoin for the last 5 years. He was just doing his own little thing. Really nice guy. He was doing it with his father as well.
Boss.
And yeah, so I gave him the address. He counted the cash. He sent me the Bitcoin. I saw 6 confirmations. I'm like, we're chilling.
You stood there for 6 confirmations.
I did. So I mean, because
was it a quick 6 or
it took
long
like
6?
it took about an hour.
Oh, nice.
But when we had a good conversation, he looked at me. He's like, I can tell that you're just getting into this. So he knew I was a noob. He definitely knew I was a noob.
What was that? Well, that's interesting. 'Cause most people's first experience, or I don't even want to say most people I know, their first experience is probably buying via Coinbase or something like that. So doing it like P2P for the first time, you definitely have like a different type of aha moment where you probably reached it quicker. Whereas like just like connecting your bank account to Coinbase and seeing it on a web UI is a lot different than actually meeting somebody in person, exchanging cash, and getting back this digital gold.
Absolutely.
Did you get it like right away? Like you saw the 6 confirmations for the first time, like holy shit, it's working.
It's working. So I mean, you receive that it's you receive it immediately that it's pending, right? And then it depending on the number of confirmations, you're like, okay, it's good to go. But that's right, Coinbase. We tried your traditional exchanges. There's Coinbase. And there's also Coin Mama. I don't know if you know Coin Mama.
Coin Mama, that rings a bell.
So Coin Mama is for the international. It's really prevalent in Africa. Okay. But they charge like 30% premiums on Bitcoin.
That's
so
crazy.
I was like, let's just get it at NAV.
So what'd you do? Did you have like a phone hotspot? Did you?
Yes, exactly. Phone hotspot. We had an Electrum wallet. And we got our Bitcoin, and I came back, and it was just so funny. It was with my dad. It was with my dad's computer, and I come back. I'm like, all right, here's your Bitcoin, and I hand him the computer.
Did he get it right away too? Was he like pumped? Was he like, sweet?
Honestly, we didn't get it until we didn't actually get it. It took us a couple of days literally to say, okay, let's just try this out. And I mean, we didn't buy a lot, but it was at least just kind of dabble. And then the more I started looking into it, the more fascinating it was. So
like beyond Andreas, like let's hop into like a Hasu like episode. Like, how did you learn? What were your sources?
Yeah.
What was your strategy? Because obviously it seems like you have bootstrapped your knowledge pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I listened to Hasu's podcast, and I actually reached out to him right after, and we kind of had a quick call after that, because I was just so fascinated at how much of what he said resonated with my learning experience as well. Where, there's just so much filtering that needs to be done.
Right.
You find that one person or those few people where like, this guy clearly has some dank signal, and you just go and you just keep like just following him, and then you
always striving for that dank signal. I like that. That might be a new Ben tagline.
There you go. And then you create a mental model of that person, and then you move on to the next. And so for me, I was really lucky because after having bought my first Bitcoin, I was off to an internship in the Valley. So I was interning at a VC.
Okay.
And it was a really small VC. There were 3 partners and myself, and it was an enterprise software, which is like super unsexy. And there was a realization that I had where I was like, there's only so much value that I could provide to these guys who have decades of experience, beyond just, sourcing some deals and looking at some industry analysis and assessing momentum. And so I was like, okay, there's got to be something that I can provide to them that they're not necessarily aware of. And at that time, it was also the first time I had been exposed to Bitcoin. So I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just spend the summer just day and night looking at Bitcoin from a research and investment perspective? And it wasn't just Bitcoin; it was obviously crypto and in general.
The landscape, yeah.
The landscape. And so I went kind of through the whole phase of, you start with Bitcoin, and then you look at, ETH, and you're like, wow, dude, fuck Bitcoin. And then you're like, oh, wait, what is this even to begin with? And so you go through the whole fat protocol phase, and then slowly but surely you start to realize, wait, it all comes back to Bitcoin. And so that's kind of the realization that I had. I'm kind of very lucky that I was actually it was pretty easy for me to filter out the signal from the noise. So you obviously have your blockchain versus, crypto. And then within that you have your Web 3.0 versus your money.
Right.
And I found the Web 3.0 thesis to be interesting.
I do as well.
I think that there is a lot to do there, but if we're talking from an investment perspective, it's still quite unproven. And at the end of the day, both you and I know it's like cryptocurrencies are money and not equity, and so
Yeah, and I mean, what we're seeing now with Lightning too, it looks like the Web3 vision can be built out on top of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, I like to say laps are the new dApps,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, or the new dApps. The laps are getting like crazy usage.
Yeah, I mean, we saw at BitDevs all the stuff that was going on.
Right.
That was quite fascinating.
Right.
Quite fascinating, and
it felt like we had like a glimpse into the future.
It was, and I think that we're going to continue to kind of see this migration from your crypto devs to your Bitcoin devs, where it's like now you're actually wanting to just go back to the basics and build on top of Bitcoin. And there seems to be like this misconception that Bitcoin's UX is never going to actually look nice in the apps that are built on top of it, but we were definitely proven wrong.
Yeah, and that's actually like a good thing to bring up. Like the UX is getting better, but I will say, like, and I said this in the newsletter, like, hey, we should give like Ethereum and the Web3 builders, quote unquote, a little props, because they build out these UX flows that are actually beautiful and probably should be instituted to some degree. But again,
I mean, Joule was taken from the MetaMask.
Yeah, it was MetaMask and MyCrypto, like a combo of the two.
Exactly.
And then, but yeah, like those apps are being built on a foundation of sand, I would argue, and I believe others would argue as well. And that is the whole sort of I don't want to say ethos, but it's like the mentality of Bitcoiners is, hey, we want to be building on sound ground, like on solid foundation. And right now, Bitcoin, in my opinion, is the soundest of all the cryptocurrency foundations right now. Yep.
And if we continue to kind of see this layered architecture, who knows what Lightning interfaces will look like in a decade from now.
Right. Yeah. We'll get more into the technical stuff. First, you have a very low tide preference story to tell us.
Yes.
What?
So
tell it. So for you freaks, you guys obviously don't know this yet. You will find out momentarily. But Yassine, I have been told by many people, has gone to extremes to prove how low time preference he is.
Yeah. So this one's for Matt specifically, because Matt doesn't know about this one, and so I'm gonna lay it down from the beginning. But so there's this saying that as Bitcoiners we know, it's like, you don't change Bitcoin changes you, right? And
Yes, very important.
I first heard it through Arjun, and it's this idea in the context of time preference specifically, or lowering time preference, right? We're like, as humans, especially as a 22-year-old who just graduated, it's like very short term in our thinking. We're constantly thinking about consumption, and we don't take time to sit and say, you know what, maybe we should save not only for ourselves, but for our family and for our future generations. And for Bitcoiners, what's I feel quite appealing when you first get in is that you realize that this is really a gateway to lowering your time preference.
Right.
And it's incredible. And anyone who's outside of it doesn't really understand it. But when you're in it, it's like, it's just so obvious. And so my kind of approach in all of this was, all right, I'm recently graduated. I still got that rush of adrenaline. I can kind of, find my way into New York. And so let's find a place to live. Right. And so my first kind of stab at it was, I'm just going to find a place close to work. It's going to be nice. I might not find roommates, so I'll be by myself. And I'll be paying enough where I can then, save and accumulate Bitcoin, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Little did I know, rent in Manhattan is an absurdity. It's actually crazy how expensive rent is here.
Some of the most expensive in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, by
swift kick in the dick every first day of the month.
The thing that I did not realize is that they charge 15% broker fees as well if you want to go through your traditional route. And so my approach was, okay, I have two options. The first is I can either pay a normal amount of rent in Manhattan and save very little, and so accumulate very little Bitcoin, or just completely 180 it and say, you know what, I'm just going to find the cheapest place I can find within an hour of my work and see how long I can survive and how long I can last.
Where were you?
So I was in Red Hook. So I ended up finding a place next to Brooklyn in Red Hook. And it was just, so my kind of, my quest into finding this place was, I went on the back pages of Facebook and Craigslist, reached out to a bunch of people, ended up looking at houses, and I had one criteria. It just needed to be clean. If it was clean, we're chilling, right?
That's all you can ask for.
That's all you can ask for, right?
That's all you can ask for.
Little did you know. I go to the first apartment, and they show me the apartment, and there's no window in the room.
That's depressing.
Dude, I don't think you understand. When you go into a bedroom and there's no window, it's like, okay, you got to up your standards a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I end up finding a place after having visited another apartment that had 5 bedrooms in the same room. And I'm like, okay, if this is what the price point is going to get, I got to find something. So I end up finding a place in Red Hook that had a room, that had a window, and that was clean. And
the trifecta.
It was the trifecta. And I was just so happy. And so for anyone who appreciates OPSEC, this whole setup was also great. The landlord I had actually never met. All she wanted was my first name and my username for my Venmo account. So the rent was month to month.
What?
Yeah, no, it was crazy. It was crazy.
It's so dope.
It was pretty sketchy though.
Definitely sketchy.
Now that I think about
but it worked out. Right?
It worked out. I guaranteed. I think I found the cheapest place in all of New York for that, and I lived there for almost 5 months.
Are you willing to disclose?
I can disclose. Yeah, no problem. So, with everything, with maintenance, electricity, I was paying $700 a month. So, which is good for New York. If you know New York,
it's very good.
It's good for New York.
How long was that commute? Was it an hour?
It was about an hour commute.
What did you take the JMs?
I took the F.
The F.
I took the F up. So I was living with 3 random women.
Never a bad thing.
Yeah, from all walks of life, from all age distribution. You had a 20-year-old who was still in college. You had a 50-year-old who had retired and was into urban planning and volunteering at the farmers market. And then you had someone in her mid-30s who had this black cat and just was kind of finding a job in the meantime. And so I was kind of there and I had a great time. I think that...
Do you keep in touch with your roommates?
I don't keep in touch with my roommates, but as I was departing, They're like, well, it was great to have you. Is there anything else that, we can do or that you can help us with? And I was like, yes, there's one thing. And I just pitched them Bitcoin. And I was like, this is something that I work in, and I would highly recommend you look into it. I'm not telling you to buy Bitcoin. I'm telling you to just educate yourself on understanding, the context of Bitcoin in today's monetary systems.
Like a true evangelist.
It was
lowering his time preference, finding a $700 apartment in New York with 3 women, leaving with a Bitcoin note, going on to the next apartment with the low time preference price point.
And
you keep spreading the word.
You'd be shocked at so the apartment was also, it could fit me in a bed. It could not even, there wasn't even enough room to fit my clothes. So you know what I did for my clothes? I rented out a locker at the gym.
Really?
And I would just have 80% of my clothes there. And in the morning I'd go to the gym, take a shower there, come back.
That's a good motivator to get workout in.
You'd be surprised at how the physical constraint made me just so much more productive.
Well, let's get into that. So yeah, you lower your time preference. You're forced to adapt. And so how were you forced to adapt? You had to get to the gym every day.
So that's kind of, there are far more takeaways that I found. I mean, I'm still young, so take all this with a grain of salt. But there were a lot of learning experiences that I had from this.
I feel like this should have been a True Life episode.
It absolutely should.
MTV True Life. I'm a Bitcoiner trying to lower my time preference.
Dude, I mean, did you see the tweet? This guy tweeted after listening to Morad and Pomp's podcast that he had quit smoking.
Oh yeah, and he was buying Bitcoin.
And that he was buying Bitcoin instead. This is a real thing, man.
Right? I mean, it's a good idea. Lower your time preference, higher your expected life expectancy too. Your life expectancy.
That's exactly right. For me, it was like I quickly realized how we're almost constrained by our own comfort, and it's true, because I had no choice but to wake up at 6 and come back and crash at 10. I had to go to the gym, and I never had felt more productive. So I ended up moving. So I moved actually a couple weeks ago because the ceiling actually started to leak, and I was like, okay,
can't have that.
It might be time to go. But in my new apartment, which I'm 15 minutes away from work, it's a struggle to wake up before 8. And it's just because I can, right? And so it's so weird how it's like you're in this almost feedback loop when you're constrained that just makes you constantly try to outdo yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you're too comfortable, it's like, oh, this is too easy. And so it's like I'm allowed to let myself go.
Yeah. No, that's why I like the newsletter. It forces me to wake up and start doing something right away. Yeah. Even though I have been slacking with the newsletters, but coming out a little later and later. It's getting hard to write, It's getting hard to write in the bear market.
So what's your strategy on that?
Just wake up and try to find something to write about.
Is it usually like you go through Twitter? Or
I go through what I retweeted and the day before. It's like, all right, what's interesting?
Okay. Well, see, the first time I was on that newsletter, you should have seen how I was just like, achievement unlocked. Man. That was just so great. I'm like, I gotta tell my mama.
Well, that's it's the whole point is trying to boost this to signal boost people, and if you're putting out good shit, it's not that hard to get in the newsletter. Thank you for providing fodder to write about.
Well, thank you.
It's a symbiotic relationship, probably more parasitic on my end, but it is no. Thank you for putting out your shit. I'm happy to signal boost it.
I mean, it's kind of so motivating, and that's honestly. When getting into, for those who aren't familiar with crypto Twitter, it's actually incredible how accessible people are.
Right.
And that's just so motivating because it's like you come from literally nothing to reaching out to people who are willing to not only educate, but also talk to you and directly respond to any questions that you have. And I think there's going to be a massive shift in just how we build ourselves out, and it starts with Twitter.
No, and it's crazy. And I don't want to sound braggy. I don't want to say brag. I don't want to sound pompous or anything. But if you say good shit, people will follow you. Like I was nervous. Like I've been on Twitter since 2011, and I was always nervous to say shit. Like I'm a bad tweeter. Number one, like I cannot craft good tweets. I'm not.
Come
like
on, Marty.
enough.
Everyone knows that you're a great tweeter.
Number two, I never like had the courage to like voice my opinion, but with Bitcoin, I felt compelled to and started. And yeah, for like the first 6 years I was on Twitter, I think I had like 300 followers, and then started talking. And it's at like 10.5K now. It's like, holy shit.
Look
like,
at you.
How the hell did that happen?
5 digits.
5 digits.
Yeah, I mean,
the one comma club.
Even beyond having a follower base, it's even if you don't, you can still reach out to people, and most of the time they'll answer.
Exactly.
And so, just as a learning mechanism, that's been quite valuable.
Yeah, no, and if sliding into DMs that's how this podcast happens. I'm just like, hey, do you want to come on?
No,
I've said this many times on this podcast. Twitter is the best communication tool that's ever been created up to this point in time.
100%. It's the best professional networking tool as well, because it's low key, almost professional networking, but they actually end up just becoming your friends.
Right.
Exactly. No, but it's true. It's like what I realized with Twitter is that what makes someone appealing is their ideas more than it is like who they are, or that you met them, because they live next to you. It's like, you have such similar ideas to the way that I think. Let me reach out to you. And it's like, oh wow, we're actually similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we should meet up and hang out.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it is. We should definitely, with a bunch of guys, just set something up. BitDevs is already a good starting point for that. I don't know if I told you this, but the first time I met Arjun Balaji, it was at a BitDevs.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and so I was following him, and I don't know if he was following me back, but he introduces himself as Arjun, and I go and I turn around and I'm like, yo, what's up, dude? As if I'd like known him for so long. He's like, sorry, who are you? I'm like, oh yeah, right. I just know you through Twitter.
My name's Yassine.
My name's Yassine.
No, that's like my first BitDevs. I think I told this story. I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast, but I told it the other night. My first BitDevs in New York City, like I was like so nervous. Like I'd only have same thing. Like I was still, I'd only ever like seen like people on Twitter, and like I was like at the BitDevs meetup, like nervous, like holy shit, like all these Bitcoin devs are here, like that I've only ever seen on Twitter. And I was like nervous, and we were at Union Square Ventures. This is so embarrassing. And at Union Square Ventures, where the BitDevs was being held, you can see across Union Square there's a huge clock that has like, it goes down like 20 digits. I had just moved to New York. I was like nervous, like really didn't have my bearings. It was 7:30 at night, so the clock had shown like 19:30. And I was like standing there next to Peter Todd and like had nothing to say. I was like, all right, Marty, say something. I was like, how prescient. We're here at a Bitcoin meetup talking about creating a new money. We had the national debt clock across like Union Square. Peter Todd looked me in the eyes. Was like, that's a time clock, buddy. I was like, oh my God. Fuck.
Yeah. Well,
no.
I mean,
but again, even after that, he put aside my idiocy and was very, very good at explaining Bitcoin and stuff like that. So these people are very accessible, and we are very spoiled here in New York in particular, I would argue.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When my friends say, what have you been up to and who have you been hanging out with? I'm like, just a bunch of people I met on Twitter. And they're like, what? I genuinely think that for those who aren't in the Twitter sphere, that there's just a complete disconnect in terms of how valuable Twitter actually is. At ARK, so Kathy, our CEO, one of the main reasons why she founded ARK was in terms of just the inability for your traditional asset management firms to be able to research in a manner that wasn't constrained by compliance.
Right.
And so she wanted to kind of create this open source research ecosystem where Twitter was at the heart of that. Where really? Like, yeah, I mean, my Twitter account is a a personal account when I'm not a part of ARK, but it's a work account when I am.
Yeah.
And it's part of like kind of our research process where you're able to kind of constantly test your assumptions, reach out to people, and in the traditional world you can't actually do that. And so there's a lot that we've taken from using Twitter, just from understanding, you know, our research that traditionally you can't really get.
That's very, very interesting that like this public tool like this could be leveraged, whereas like in the past would be something like Bloomberg where you pay thousands of dollars a month, but I wouldn't even call them like so similar. Like Twitter gives you like such another
Right. I mean, or even LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn is terrible.
LinkedIn is ass. I'm still on it.
Are you a crypto expert on LinkedIn?
No, God no. God no.
Yeah. The first week on the job, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in Bitcoin. So I wrote cryptocurrency analyst as my title, and after getting the flood of messages, I'm like, okay, I'm even putting crypto anywhere near LinkedIn.
I'm a janitor.
Yeah,
I'm a janitor on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
janitor for the digital cypherpunk revolution.
I mean,
so let's get into mining. You're interested in mining. You want to talk a lot about mining. There's a lot of interesting stories going on about mining in particular right now. CoinShares yesterday came out with something that I wrote about. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
You've done some great stuff on mining as well. You've been doing research around it, in particular at ARK. What have you been looking at?
Yeah, so some of the first research that I've been looking at ARK is in and around mining. So one of the first papers I read that kind of really clarified what Bitcoin's core innovation was, and no, it's not blockchain, was Bitcoin's academic pedigree by Arvind Narayan, I'm mispronouncing that, and Jeremy Clark, where basically, and I quote this, he's like, they say Bitcoin it's not in any of its individual components, but rather the intricate way in which these components fit together to breathe life into the system. And so that at the highest level, we understand that Bitcoin is bootstrapped with a circular dependence on three main components, right? You have your reward mechanism that incentivizes honest node behavior during consensus process. You have proof of work that does away with identity and Sybil attacks. And then you have a consensus algorithm, Nakamoto consensus, to prevent double spending, right? So it's the reward mechanism combined with proof of work and Nakamoto consensus that is really its core innovation, right? Now, increasingly, especially in this bear market, we get so much FUD around, you know, the viability of proof of work, as you know, and as CoinShares know, around the energy front, but also on threats to just network decentralization, right? Where there's this base assertion now that Bitcoin's proof of work is inherently converging towards centralization,
right?
And that at the end of the day, you'll just have a handful of very large, vertically integrated entities that will end up, you know, not only dominating consensus, but also the whole mining ecosystem as a whole, right? And so I when first getting into that, bought kind of into it, and because I wasn't really familiar with the mining dynamics. And so this research that I did, which was in collaboration with Derek Shu, who's at Blockchain Capital, we actually
he's a Penn kid too.
Yeah, we graduated the same year, and I met him at Penn, and we were kind of the first two who we first met at Penn, and we really connected just on a crypto level. So
boss.
So what we decided to do is like basically explore and break down every layer of the mining stack. And the mining pipeline, and assess like the situation in that, you know, when you actually break down every layer of the stack, you realize that it's far more nuanced than, you know, Bitmain owns 50% hash power, and so we're all screwed, right?
But it's such an easy narrative.
It's so easy.
It's so easy.
It is, and that's why the easy things sell,
right?
And we have to, one step at a time, just debunk the FUD. So roughly the mining pipeline it's broken into 5 stages. And I'm sure that you're aware of this, but to provide context, it actually helps. It helps me to, you know, kind of get a historical look at kind of how mining has evolved.
I like that. I can appreciate that.
Sure. So in 2009, we know, Bitcoin mining began as this hobbyist activity, right? Where the first mining was performed by your standard CPU from desktops. And then about a year later, mining hardware shifted to GPUs, where you had your first publicly available GPU miners that appeared in late 2010. And then given the increased difficulty to mine, the whole idea of pooled mining was introduced the same year, which then allowed entities to basically, participate in a single pool and then share the rewards based on how much they've contributed pro rata. And then 2011, you had your FPGA-based miners, which was even more specialized than GPUs.
Yeah. How long was that period?
So that
FPGA? Was that like
that was very very quick, short, I believe.
Right.
A few like a year or something like that, or it might have. So when I'm not exactly sure when ASICs hit the landscape. I know so I don't know if you read the iterative capital thesis.
Yeah.
So they actually have a really interesting chart on how hash rate increases based on the evolution of chips.
right?
But yeah, so after FPGAs, you had your ASICs, right, which were basically used for the sole purpose of mining Bitcoin with the SHA-256 algorithm. And so with the rise of these ASICs, the mining ecosystem has really just turned into a full-out professional industry, right, where your computation is now in these data centers. And so what was once a hobbyist activity in Bitcoin's early days has now just turned into a fully fledged professional industry.
Right. And so let's talk about the not only an industry but a fully fledged supply chain. Well, yeah.
So we kind of looked at the supply chain, and so it's not so that's what kind of the really interesting part is, right? Where it's like, okay, now that we've assessed the evolution into a professional mining industry, your classic fuzzster is going to go, okay, well, now you have these large mining equipment manufacturers like Bitmain who have been able to create these profitable businesses, although as of late, it's
bit questionable. Hard to be profitable when you have Bcash on or even Bitcoin on your balance sheet. Sure.
Trade of the year, huh? And so that's basically kind of the argument, where you have these large miners who have exposure to every layer of the stack, right? So the first stage starts at the ASIC design level, right? So you have these design services provided by these mining equipment manufacturers that develop and optimize mining chip architecture, right? And so this involves really highly trained individuals and teams, and they can basically drastically affect the quality of a manufacturer's design. And so hardware engineers who are familiar with the ASIC design process specifically, they're really heavily coveted in the mining manufacturing space.
There's like 4, right? 4 foundries, or
exactly. So so the foundries are separate from the actual ASIC design. So I'll go into that. But I'm talking more about basically, for instance, I don't know if you saw the whole What's Miner.
Yes.
So that's a really good example of that. Where
I'm thinking of a step before that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'll go to I'll talk about the step, but so Bitmain, for instance, had a history of failing their tape outs, and it cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there was actually speculation that was because their former lead engineer left and started his own company, What's Miner. And his team, was reportedly responsible for the S9 and the S7. And so What's Miner now comes out with their own miner, and you kind of do the comps, and you realize that What's Miner is actually more efficient than the S9, right? And so that's exactly right. So to your point, you have mining chip architecture, and that mining chip architecture is designed with consideration for the latest generation node, and those nodes are the ones supplied by foundries.
Yes.
So for the freaks out there, see, I've been waiting for that.
For the freaks out there,
I was practicing for. I'm not gonna lie. So, what is, because I didn't know this, right? So a tech node is just a standardized semiconductor manufacturing process and its design rules. And so what that just basically involves making integrated circuits with transistors that have specific features around performance and around size, right? And so each generation of the semiconductor process is classified as node of length X nanometers. So that's why you see the 7 nanometer, the 16, the 28, the 55. All of these are basically advancement of the node is prompted by just a shrinking feature size.
Okay.
So the smaller, the more compact the transistors are, the more advanced the node is. And so this tech node is the process that's used to create the integrated circuits present in these mining rigs. And so on a cost basis, that's like the most expensive part of the box.
Yeah,
exactly. And so what's kind of really interesting is that as Bitcoin mining chips have transitioned to ASICs, a rig's efficiency is now largely driven by how advanced the technology node is. And the technology node is not actually the Bitmains of the world don't actually have any control over that, right?
Exactly.
And so if you look at the trend in the last 5 years of how, like, for instance, the replacement cycles of Bitcoin ASIC hardware, they've extended dramatically. So it's really interesting if you plot down when Bitmain released their first batch, their second batch, versus now like their S9s, it just slowly...
Like 6, 12, 18, 24.
Exactly.
Probably like 36 after that.
Exactly. So it's like, in terms of just the amount of times to replace that cycle, it's like you had November of 2013, Bitmain released its S1. That was... that S1 ran at like 2,000 watts per terahash. The following summer, Bitmain releases their S3. It's 3 times more efficient. And so you compare that to 2016, where Bitmain released the S9. We're now in 2018, and they just announced that they were going to release the S15, or I don't know which one it was. The next, but it took 2 years for them to develop a new node.
So is this a product of, like you said, everything's just getting more efficient, harder to innovate on? So is this going to lead us to a period where it's sort of perfectly competitive? Where
exactly, yes. So that was basically our takeaway, right? Where it's like the reason why Bitmain was able to have such short replacement cycles. Where you could literally, and that's where that was their bread and butter, right? Whereas like every 3 months they'd come out with a new rig and they'd screw the market because these miners would have to buy this new rig in order to stay competitive. But the reason why is because they actually weren't caught up to the latest cutting edge node. So I could, if a Samsung or a TSM, like Taiwanese semi manufacturing company, they're developing, a 10 nanometer or 7 nanometer node, and the mining space is still on 55 nanometer or 28 nanometer.
They're going to have an inherent advantage.
Exactly. They're able to have these very fast replacement cycles. And now we're at a point where your rate determining step is at the node level, where it's like we're at 7 nanometers now, and the most efficient rigs are 7 nanometers. And so what's really interesting is kind of looking at the foundry dynamics as a result of that, right? So to give you an idea, so the foundries are the ones who provide the cutting edge node or nodes, right? And so to date, there are 28 foundries that provide node fabrication. Only 3 provide leading edge, right? And only 2 are relevant to Bitcoin. You have Samsung and you have TSM. And TSM pretty much destroys Samsung on this front. And so if we really want to talk centralization, it's at the foundry level more than it is at the mining equipment level.
Right. No, that's like the big. That's probably, and I've argued this in person, like in private in the past. Like that's probably is the most centralizing factor. It's the foundries, but it's like such a arduous process to start a foundry, right? Like
exactly. So development requires like billions of dollars of investment,
right?
And the only way that foundries can prevent increasing R&D costs is by driving up chip prices, without driving up chip prices, is by just producing more chips. And so you see this just, I don't know if you saw in a couple months ago, Global Foundries, they announced that they were just going to halt their development on the cutting edge node, and they were going to focus on something else. So you kind of see this funneling where it's like only the large players can keep up with the cutting edge node, because otherwise it just costs too much.
Right.
And at each node advancement, the required capex also increases. So you have like the number of foundries that are decreasing, while the cost to create the cutting edge node is increasing.
So you're going to be able to just price gouge people.
Exactly. And so to your point about kind of leveling the playing field, where, you know, in 2016, your S9 was by far the most performant miner by far. Like if you run the numbers just on a specs basis, 2 years in, Bitmain still hasn't released their own because they're at now the latest node. And now like your competition is entirely indistinguishable. You have like WhatsMiner, you have InnoSilicon, you have Canon, you have GMO, you have eBang, you have all these, and it's like Bitmain is kind of in the middle of the pack. And so you start to realize that the competitive advantage is going to come not at the design level anymore.
It's going to come at like the OpEx part.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right. And so this kind of further reinforces the idea of, you know, the concept of Asic commoditization, which I first heard through Tour. It's exactly that. It's like,
describe it. Describe Asic commodification.
So it's this idea that mining players like Bitmain no longer have a competitive edge.
Okay.
Because the rate determining step is at the node level. And so in the last 2 years, we've been able to see a bunch of competition catch up to Bitmain on a performance level. And so now you basically have 5 or 6 players providing the exact same miner.
Yes.
And so the whole providing mining equipment is just completely commoditized as a result.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's what. Okay. So that's how. I haven't heard Tor's description of it that way. So I thought.
So explain to me what
I was getting into like. So I was trying to drive us into like where are the OpEx efficiencies going to be driven now? Because like obviously people are going to be focusing on that. So it's like energy costs now. And
so I mean, if you kind of think about like the cost, so that's for mining, right? The cost to mine is largely driven by electricity costs. You have your maintenance, your cooling, your leasing, and you have obviously the hardware costs, which I mean, the life cycle of hardware is going to extend out now that we are at the latest node. Yeah. But yeah, electricity costs. So, you know, paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour versus 1 cent per kilowatt hour is going to be the difference between mining profitably and not mining profitably. And so from that standpoint, we're definitely seeing a convergence towards just zero cost electricity. And
which is beautiful.
It's fantastic.
Right. And that's what I wrote about in the Bend today. I was touching on the CoinShares thing is like, it's driving, like, shout out to Phil Geiger, I believe. I hope I'm getting your name right, Phil. He pointed this out to me on Twitter yesterday, but Bitcoin literally pays us to use renewable energy, which like drives the demand for renewable energy and therefore the production of renewable energy. And theoretically, in the search and drive for that renewable energy, there will be excess, which can be used for other things other than Bitcoin mining.
Exactly. So we kind of both really enjoyed that CoinShares piece.
Give me your thoughts on it. Give the freaks your thoughts on it.
I mean, this idea that, you know, Bitcoin can be a mechanism to unlock these stranded energy assets, I think is something that we need to continue pushing the narrative for, because I mean the CoinShares for a lot of people was quite enlightening,
eye-opening.
It was.
And so let's so there's a lot of people that were in my mentions today. Well, like that's flawed. There's no way it's 77%. Number one, I don't know if that's true. It seems like these guys did some pretty thorough research. Number two, even if it's a magnitude of order off, like say it was 25%, the world average of industries using renewable energy is like 18%. So even if CoinShares is off by 50%, Bitcoin is still an improvement on your typical industry in this world.
I mean, that's the thing with these FUDsters.
And I don't think it's 50% wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
you would know more than I.
The extent to which I did research on this was literally just reading the paper.
Okay.
But they'll never be satisfied anyways. So it's like if you say 70%, 50%, 10%, they'll always find an excuse. But this is actually something that's triggered my interest, especially after reading the CoinShares. And I was talking about this to you earlier before the podcast, where it's like there's a really interesting hypothetical that I was discussing with Jonathan Libov, who's formerly at USV and now he's at Bloomberg. And
Love Jonathan.
He's great. And we're thinking about our next the next topic of research to be around this hypothetical or this thought experiment, right? Where it's like we're wondering if some of the angst around energy efficiency of Bitcoin mining is just due to the fact that Satoshi may not have anticipated this situation entirely in terms of the opportunity to unlock these energy stranded assets.
So what do you mean?
So here's an interesting thought experiment.
I
right?
like this thought experiment.
There are two thought experiments that we can play off of. The first is less realistic, but I'm still gonna do it because Jonathan was the one who presented this one, and then I countered with the second thought experiment, which seems to be a little bit more realistic. But what would the debate look like, right, if the original white paper had proposed Bitcoin as a solution to this problem, right? Where hydropower is not fully utilized because of transport costs, where solar and wind power is not fully utilized because of variability.
Geothermal.
Right, exactly. So what if Satoshi came and said, you know what? Why don't we just build out this arbitrary asset that unlocks this energy demand? And so if we kind of shift the perception like that, where it's like, I am building this asset because I see an opportunity to create positive externalities, I guarantee you that, we wouldn't ever be talking about whether or not this wastes energy.
Right. If it was just prefaced that certain way.
Exactly. So that's that's the idea. It's like, first, let's acknowledge that energy is not fully utilized. Second, let's find a better way to utilize it. And third, let's just build sovereign money.
Yes. And then, that's what I wanted to touch on towards the end of the bend today was like, what does this open up from a possibility of human ingenuity now that these previously unharnessable energy sources are now able to be tapped into? Like, how does that change the way we operate as a society? I mean, I don't mean to drop a heavy question.
No, I think it just goes back to the fact that we are discussing that Satoshi didn't necessarily realize this insight, and that 10 years in, there's something that is groundbreaking in terms of not only how we can position Bitcoin as a saver of stranded energy assets, but also as in like, who knows what that might look like in a few years, and when we kind of exactly like you say untap this human ingenuity.
Yeah, like talk about externalities. That's why I love Andrew DeSantis's idea that there will be communities around mining operations that are tapping into these previously untapped resources. So you'll have like a more disparate humanity in a good way, like more localized and stuff like that. It's like crazy to think of like, okay, again, like Bitcoin presented an optionality with money where it's like, all right, now we'll actually get onto the tweet that we have up here eventually, but provides an optionality between fiat money and apolitical money that did not previously exist 10 years ago. And now, not only does it create that optionality, it's allowing us to tap into this energy resource, and then just by even like creating activity around these sources of energy is going to like somehow lead to some sort of innovation or something like that. We don't even know.
That's the thing. We have no idea.
It would not have been explored unless there was a reason to expend energy to chase this funny internet money that we're all addicted to.
Yeah. And then even that's
getting cosmic on a Friday night, dude.
My mind kind of hurts right now. But like even more realistically, it's so there's the flip side to that where it's like, okay, let's not start with the premise of there is a way for us to unlock energy assets. It's like, let's start with, okay, let's build sovereign money, right? Like Satoshi. So that's the first kind of thing, is that I want to build sovereign money. And then let's find a way to then build sovereign money while keeping in mind that there are also underutilized and stranded energy assets, right? And so why not unlock all unused stranded energy assets by building sovereign money? And it's like, what if he had presented the white paper like that?
Powering our sovereign money with stranded renewable energy sources.
And there's no way that you'd have this FUD. The outcome would be the same. And it would just be like, that's it. There's the perception, though, is different.
Oh,
and so
it seems like it would be too easy.
It does, but
right? I think it had to be this way.
Oh, in terms of yeah.
You had to, yeah.
You got no pain, no gain, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But no, I do agree. It would be so much easier if that was, hey, we're talking a lot about narratives in this bear market. Maybe this is one we should be focusing a lot more on.
I think so. I think it's definitely worth exploring more. So that's what I'm looking at right now.
77%. I mean, if CoinShares stats are correct, which I mean, looking at the methodology of their research, it seems like they have a pretty good grasp of the calculations they're making. They even admit there probably is a margin of error, but it's not that much. They said 77% as a conservative estimate. 77% renewable energy is used for Bitcoin mining, where every other industry in the world, like 18% is the average. That is fucking ridiculous. Like,
Bitcoin's the cleanest network,
right? It's the cleanest industry. Like, in that framing, it's the cleanest industry.
It is. I mean,
in the world.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see a rebuttal to that. To the CoinShares paper, where it's like maybe there were some assumptions that inflated those numbers, but regardless, that we're even having this discussion should say something, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people that are like refuting with that FUD are like saying China coal, but if you talk to any miners, which I have been recently, like they, especially miners that have been in China, like a lot of miners moving out of China. So
what's your I've spoken to a few miners, but most of them are U.S. based. If you have like, what's the general sentiment in mining in China?
The consistent ambiguity of the Chinese government, what they're going to do, and then particularly with the weather situation, it's like the dry season there, so like the hydroelectric dams in China right now aren't producing as much water. But I talked to somebody who knows more than I about that situation. They said the weather's not as big as effect as people moving, worried about like the government cracking down.
I remember watching an Andreas video where he was like,
because
that you think that, go for it.
Yeah, and the government's cracking down because these miners have just been getting away with basically like siphoning off free energy, and it's just like getting a bigger microscope on it from the government now. So,
and you don't think like local authorities are kind of low key in on this, and they're just
I don't know enough about local Chinese culture to speak with authority on it, but I would highly suspect that there's definitely some fuckery. There's definitely probably some fuckery going around in other countries too, with local authorities and Bitcoin mining and shit like that.
Yeah, I think last month Iran announced that Bitcoin mining was a legitimate industry. And so I can only imagine what that might look like now.
Well, you're saying Morocco was a bit ambiguous with their laws when you were trying to first initially buy Bitcoin, but are they posturing towards being open to Bitcoin mining?
So yeah, there's that 900 megawatt farm that's being built out. I've actually spoke to one of the people who was looking into it, and honestly, at this point, it seems quite promising and exciting.
It's a lot of megawatts.
But that one, it's a lot of megawatts, and two, it's still very, very premature.
Yeah.
And three, the idea that there are some parts of the government that still aren't on board with this whole thing to begin with, and so there has to be approval from the top before any of this can kind of come to fruition.
Does that have anything to do with Bitcoin being like Sharia compliant, or?
No, I mean, honestly, I've kind of looked into it. I think Bitcoin is pretty Sharia compliant.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the idea of it not bearing really any interest. The whole concept of fractional reserve banking doesn't really exist in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, generating profits without really just by just sitting on your money.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you kind of, again, look at this as not an investment, but as money, and we're just early on in a monetization event, then, this seems to be much sounder than any of the existing monies that we see today,
Right.
which arguably are a lot sketchier from a Sharia standpoint.
Yeah.
So
I would argue. No, it's fascinating to see Bitcoin making governments the world over react in certain ways, and how those governments react to Bitcoin forcing the issue upon them, because it is forcing the issue upon them, which actually leads me to a quote that I wrote down, and was one of your tweets.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin is the experiment that allows us to experiment.
Yes.
So we have not been allowed to experiment with currencies or other monies outside of fiat currencies, and like I said, Bitcoin is forcing the issue, and it's allowing us to experiment, and the governments have to react to that experiment. And you wrote this tweet in reaction to a hike quote. You want to expand on it at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So this quote was basically about not only has the government basically hijacked money, but that they've also limited our ability to experiment with money. And so we don't actually know what the ideal traits were, because for the last 2,000 years, we haven't really been able to have a free market monetary system. And so so I'm currently finishing up a paper with Misir.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're low key collabing on.
I met Misir for the first time on Monday night. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we've met a few times. It was so funny because we have a mutual friend. So he goes to Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
We have a mutual friend in common, and after we started writing the paper, and then he texts me. He's like, "Yo, are you gonna be there Saturday?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, at this guy's birthday," and I'm like, "No way!" and so we were both invited to the same birthday, and we met there. We met before the birthday to finish up the paper, and small world. But we're basically kind of looking at this idea of, is a cryptocurrency or is money like a winner takes all or winner takes most narrative?
Mm-hmm.
And why in kind of the existing framework do we have like 180 different currencies, right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of come to the conclusion that, okay, if you understand what drives monetary premium, right? And it's this idea that, as it goes from a collectible to a store of value to a medium of exchange to a unit of account, there is basically more belief that it becomes a
Better
global money.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's basically a collectively shared belief that this money holds the strongest attributes.
Mm-hmm.
The bullish case for Bitcoin, Vijay Boyapati's kind of explanation of what makes a store of value sound.
GOAT for first time
That's
first
one
time
that
explorers of Bitcoin. I said that one.
Definitely. That's one I send to a bunch of my the people who kind of want to break in, but
Send it to your roommates.
Send it to my roommates. I send them that. Ethics of Money Production.
Ethics of Money Production is a very underrated piece of education that every Bitcoiner should read.
Right. So basically, the idea that I think and we think that for the first time, the technological nature of cryptocurrencies provides a bedrock for a truly free market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like for the first time, it's open source. Anyone can kind of build whatever they want, and anyone can choose to participate in whatever network they want. And if this is to store their wealth, then it seems like by default, it's just very circular in how just monetary premium is driven. And so at equilibrium, it would seem like it's a winner takes all, or winner takes most, if not all. And so by the technological nature of kind of cryptocurrencies, what I mean by that is that, it's borderless. that there's interoperability amongst crypto networks, right? That you have this idea of economic abstraction, right? Where I think Jeremy Rubin, he had that whole ETH will collapse to zero, and he makes some very sound arguments around the idea that if you're able to pay gas with the buzzword coin, then what's the point of ever holding ETH? And so at the end of the day, it's driven by, the premium is driven by our willingness to hold.
Right.
And so if you're able to do the same functionality with whatever the soundest money is, then you're going to converge towards that money.
Exactly. Because why would you risk it?
Exactly. Combine that with the fact that we're going to continue to see additional functionality built on this winning money. And so I think Suma with James Prestwich, for instance, he kind of released this whole thing where you can verify Bitcoin payments on top of ETH, and you basically had this like NFT or non-fungible token auction where there was an ETH executed smart contract that you paid with Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, well, what's the point of ETH, right?
Right.
So, I mean, but that's the idea, is that under
there will be an app platform that will enable the smart contract, and Bitcoin will just be used as a fuel for that eventually. Like I've been saying this I feel like I've been beating a dead horse.
I mean, you've been saying this, Marty, but not everyone's as enlightened as you.
I would not call myself enlightened. But not even staying on like the monetary premium thing. The fact that you and Monsieur are writing this is like one of the things I love about Bitcoin, is like not even force. It's got smart people coming together and collaborating on like media. I know it sounds cheesy, but like Medium posts, but like very important ones. Like people enamored by a subject coming together, like Hasu and Alexander Legal. Hasu's written with like 15 partners. He's like the slut of the writing industry right now. He's going around writing with everybody. He's definitely
one of the most original thinkers I've come across.
Oh, I fucking love Hasu. Hasu, we need to write a piece together. We've talked about this.
Hasu, we also need to write a piece together.
But no, it's like fascinating that it's something I've never seen outside of Bitcoin, where people like feel so compelled to push out content like this.
And it forces you to learn as well,
right?
It's like, it's not like we're experts, and I hate the word experts because we're far from anything that remotely resembles an expert. But it's like we're
explorers,
curious, right?
Explorers documenting our journey, I would say.
Exactly right. So that should be coming out hopefully soon. And I'd love for you to take a look beforehand.
Definitely
get your thoughts.
Definitely send it my way.
Yep.
No, it's fucking. We live in weird times, and we're discovering this stuff. It's actually something I was thinking about. I was pacing. I'm a big pacer, especially like when I'm trying to write the bent. I like walk around my apartment a lot, but I was thinking, just thinking about like the narratives, the changing narratives, and specifically about my conversation with Dan Held when we were talking about Roger Ver, and maybe how some people had a certain perception of Bitcoin at a given point in time, and that vision may not be as applicable to Bitcoin today. And I said, like, these people have not evolved with Bitcoin. And I was actually pretty pissed that I used the word evolved, where I truly believe like Bitcoin's being revealed to us. It's not like evolving. It's being like the limitations of the network and everything's being revealed. It is evolving in some ways, but its limitations again are being revealed to us instead of like evolving.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. Obviously, the whole visions of Bitcoin thing is a testament to that, where it's like you have these shifting narratives, because at the end of the day, and this is what I realized, is that no one actually knows what's going on, right? And so all we can do is kind of do our own research, what makes us kind of wake up in the morning, and look into whatever part of it is. But I mean, there's just so many factors involved that none of us, I guarantee, have considered that will very likely change whatever perception we have of Bitcoin.
It's like an expanding universe. We literally cannot know what it has not expanded into yet. We are discovering it as...
Dude, my head hurts.
We're discovering as it's happening, which is awesome. And it's fun. And that's what makes it so fun. And it makes me wake up and write about it every day. It's like, all right, what the fuck's happening? What else are we discovering today? What is Bitcoin revealing to us?
We're really fortunate to be in this position. that honestly I don't feel like I'm actually ever really doing work.
Yeah, it's a Friday night. We're here recording
Dude,
a podcast.
and I'm having such a good time. So you're going to Paris?
Paris on Monday.
Paris, ben je dois apprendre un peu de français alors.
Non, je ne comprends français.
Ben tu parles bien.
I don't know what you said.
No,
Did I? Is that? See, I took Latin and Spanish,
Uh-huh.
so I just assume I know the Romance languages. Did I just say I don't understand French?
Repeat that.
Je ne comprends français.
Je ne comprends pas le français. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
Okay.
I asked that because the whole Bitcoin buy Bitcoin in the Paris protests.
That's actually why I'm going. I'm going to join the Yellow Vest. It's not a trip of leisure; it's a trip of revolution.
I was going to ask about that. Are you going to have your own customized little vest?
I was listening to a podcast today. Do you know why they all have the vest?
Why?
Because it's like mandated in France that you have to have like a yellow vest in the trunk of your car. So whenever you buy a car in France, it comes loaded with a yellow vest in the back, like in case it ever breaks down on the side of the road.
Like as a yield signal?
Yes.
Interesting.
So like there was like no like capitalism behind this. People actually already had their vests and were able to just go in their car and put it on. So be aware if you're an authoritarian government and you don't want to give people tools to rebel against you, which the French government did.
I had no idea.
I thought that was fascinating. No, yeah, I'm excited to go to Paris. You got some recommendations for me, correct?
Yes, I have a list, and I want you to check off every item of that
I'm
list.
gonna try. My wife's got a tome of an itinerary, so we'll see.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do a little combo.
I'm not a big. We gotta have a debate, me and my wife, because I'm not a big itinerary guy. I just like to go with the flow.
I feel like, especially in Paris, as one of the most romantic cities in the world, you just got to be spontaneous, Marty.
Yeah, I'm a big spontaneity guy. All right.
So what do you got planned?
Nothing.
I know.
Show up and walk. You know.
That honestly, you're gonna have a great time.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city. Most of my cousins actually live there. They studied there, and my mom actually went to college there as well.
Oh hell yeah, where at?
That's where my parents met too, in Paris.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So there's a whole story behind that. But yeah, so you should have a good time. How long are you gonna be there for?
It's like 5 days.
Okay.
Quick trip.
Oh, so it's not too long.
Quick rip. I'll be back in New York.
Well, the list that I'm gonna send you is like 3 weeks worth. So I might have to boil it down.
I wish we were going for 3 weeks. That would be dope. I need to travel more. It's my first trip in a while. I'm excited. But I do, like you mentioned your cousins. I actually have a rendezvous with my cousins here in the city tonight. We have a nice Christmas party.
Nice. Is it kind of a potluck style?
No, potluck in the sense that we'll all bring a unique bottle of wine and share it that way.
So do you have like these traditions that you have? Do you play like charades or?
We never do charades.
You just talk.
We're a drunken Irish family, so it's all talking, listening to
Irish.
music, and drinking way too much wine.
Nice. Well, it sounds fun. Well, then I can't keep you waiting too long then.
No, you're not. I was gonna say it was the shot clock, but like what should we touch on before we leave? This tweet about like you bootstrapping your knowledge. How helpful was Bitcoin Talk?
Bitcoin Talk is amazing.
This is actually an interesting topic because Nick Carter brought this up recently.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the debates that we were having
have already
in the perpetuity
fleshed out.
happened like the first 2 years of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So you had this tweet thread which I really loved, like explaining like Bitcoin Talk threads like have so many gems in them. Yeah.
So actually, I drew a lot of inspiration from my historical digging from Nick. Because he's the historian, the Bitcoin historian, the self-proclaimed Bitcoin historian, and so I'm just his apprentice, like I tell him. But literally, there's this one day I'm like, let me just dive deep into the P2P Foundation posts and the Bitcoin Talk forum posts just to see what it was like and what people were talking. And for those who haven't, there's definitely some digging to do because the conversations that they were having around Bitcoin as really just this experiment that everyone's kind of collectively trying to figure out what the next steps are.
Right.
And so you see kind of these people just discovering it, being at them asking, okay, let's create some sort of project where we provide this Bitcoin faucet. where people can just,
Gavin Anderson was giving out, like, you can go to this website,
I
get
know,
5 Bitcoin for free.
I saw, and I think there's like this Spanish dude that just completely Sybil attacked it.
Just right bots, scrape it.
And just took on. It's like, you can never have anything good when you think about free Bitcoin. It's like, it's quite an attractive project.
Right.
But yeah, I basically, I don't remember all the posts of the tweet, but anything from like, exactly. So Satoshi kind of literally having the first link to download Bitcoin v0.1.
Mm-hmm.
And because this is literally on the internet, when you see that, it's like, this is a part of history.
Yeah.
And we're also only 10 years into this history, but imagine in like 100, 200 years, if you have the, Wayback Machine and you kind of go and look, like, this was download v.1.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of interesting other posts around people kind of just losing, thousands and thousands of Bitcoin because they lost their wallet,
private keys,
and their private keys. The idea of Satoshi when they had first announced that WikiLeaks was going to accept Bitcoin.
Don't kick the hornet's nest.
Exactly, and everyone's like, "Oh, this is great! This is an amazing opportunity for us to spread the word." And Satoshi was just like, "No, it's important to kind of tread cautiously."
And my favorite, August 7th, 2010, Satoshi destroying the mining is wasteful.
Yeah. This is not
August 7th, 2010. It is a net positive for the world.
That one's one for the books, where he's like, not owning Bitcoin is the net waste. Like,
right.
From that, I guess we just gotta drop our mics because like Nick said, they've been talking about these FUD arguments since 2011.
Yeah.
And they're just constantly being recycled. Matt's OG tweet of calling it in June. Right. He's like, the lowest hanging fruit for this next bear market is going to be the mining FUD death spiral.
And it came. Not even 6 months later, Matt Odell calling it out in June.
Yeah.
But it's true. We've heard the death spiral like last bear market too. It was like, that's why the difficulty adjustment works. And there will always be ideological miners. And each miner has a different cost point. Price point,
and it's highly variable.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I for one, so I'm almost 5 months into this job. So throughout my whole professional career, I've only been in a bear market. And I don't know if you saw Derek's tweet, but he's like, I since working full time in crypto, I've been in a bear market forever. So I don't know what it's like on the other side. I'm chilling.
That's a good place to earn your chops. I'm a little jealous. Actually, no. When I first got into Bitcoin, 2013, 2014, when I started getting down too. And I still don't fully work at Bitcoin yet. Is this a job? Is this a job? What we're doing right now?
This is a job. I mean, we're on a Friday night.
That's just true.
Just, talking Bitcoin.
Well, it's always fun to me, and this last hour and a half was very fun. I appreciate you coming on. You have a parting note for the freaks out there?
Not particularly. I mean, thank you for having me. This is honestly such an honor.
Oh, stop it, dude.
No, really. Thank you for, because you reached out. You're like, yo, come on the pod whenever, and thanks for what you're doing. And just keep on grinding. I'm loving this bear market. I'm slowly accumulating.
We'll keep grinding. Keep telling your roommates about Bitcoin, and keep crushing it at ARK, dude. I can't wait to see the paper you and Masir put out.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you so much.
All right. That's all we got for this week, freaks. Peace and love. Be careful out there. Actually, no. Drive fast and take chances this weekend.